Hi, I'm Aurora Thornhill. I am the science lead at Kickstarter, and today we're going to be chatting with David Lang, creator 4x Over. He's the creator and co-founder of OpenROV, also the creator of a platform, Open Explorer, that is a platform for connected exploration, and the author of a book, Zero to Maker. So welcome, David. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So while we wait for questions to appear, people can submit questions via this Hangout or via Twitter at Kickstarter Tips. I'm just gonna sort of throw some things out there to get the conversation started. So your first project, or first sort of large project on Kickstarter was the original OpenROV project. Can you talk a bit about what made you decide to bring that to Kickstarter and sort of how that process happened?
Sure, yeah. So we did the original OpenROV Kickstarter project in July or August of 2012. So a little more than 3 years ago. And it's fun because we recently went back and looked at that Kickstarter project a lot because we were thinking about doing this latest one for the new Trident. So we kind of went back and looked at that video, and it's pretty fun to watch because we were so much younger. So it was back in the garage that Eric Stackpole and I had started in. So we had been working on the underwater robot project for about a year to that point. So we had been prototyping different ideas, trying to get our early prototypes of an underwater robot to work. And we finally had got it to the point where we thought, okay, we want to get more people involved. So we had this forum, openrov.com, and some people were contributing, giving us advice, but our ideas were that the best way to move this project forward is to get these kits out into the hands of other people. And so we launched it on Kickstarter. And at that time, there were a few other open hardware projects that had been successful. And so, we ended up raising $100,000 back in 2012. And that was the first 100 open ROVs that went out into the world.
And for that time, that was a pretty significant amount of money to raise. I think prior to that, like February, was when we started to see hardware taking off. How did it feel, to find that sort of success on Kickstarter? You raised, significantly above your goal.
Yeah, so to add a little more context to what was happening on Kickstarter that time, that was just after the Pebble had raised $1 million. Wait,
or $10 million.
Was that the first one raised 10 million?
Yeah.
I think the first one raised $1 million. Really?
No, it raised 10 million. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So.
But that was after Elevation Dock raised, I think that was the first $1 million project, and then Double Fine surpassed it in February of 2012.
Okay, so then, yes. Okay, because I remember talking to people and being like, I don't know if they're going to get to 10 million. Maybe they do. That's amazing. So so there were big projects on Kickstarter happening already. I don't know, for us, it felt like a lot, like $100,000 was a lot of money, but it was also, when you're on the other end of that, it just feels like a lot of pressure because you're like, oh my God, now we have to ship all of these things out. And we were in a kind of a weird spot because we knew what we had to do and we had a timeline to do it, but then all of a sudden Eric had to go to Antarctica for his other job at the time because he was a ROV pilot. And so he had to leave and go early to Antarctica. So all of a sudden I was very alone trying to fulfill all those Kickstarter kits. And, I think it's easy from the outside to look at the money and to think, oh my gosh, that's like the most important thing that's happened there. But what you're actually doing is really creating these relationships.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people don't do a good enough job of thinking about those as a really, really long-term investment. Because a lot of those people, a number of them have actually come to work for us. A lot of those people are still in our community. We still communicate regularly. We've gone on adventures and trips with them. And a lot of them were actually, around to back our other Kickstarter project for the Trident. So I think it's misleading to look at a Kickstarter project and to say, oh, okay, that happened at one period of time and then it was over. What I viewed it as like this, we just got to the next level.
Yep.
And we had more people involved, and then more people got involved after that for different reasons and various reasons. And again, with the Trident, I also look at it as getting to the next level, having an ROV that's easy to use, that works right out of the box. And so yeah, I mean, I look at this as kind of a long-term conversation with everyone who's been a part of this project.
Yeah,
I still think of it as a project.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it still is a project. It's ongoing. And you have Open Explorer, which sort of formalizes this idea of a community of people going out. And it's not just people that are using OpenROVs, but anybody who's going out and sort of exploring the world, doing DIY science. Can you talk about the sort of evolution from this community that originally was just sort of hanging out on the OpenROV forums, talking, iterating on this robot, to a community of explorers that now is all over the world and goes sort of far beyond just people that are using your robots?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to understand more of like the context of why we started OpenROV in the first place. So Eric Stackpole and I met in 2010, in December of 2010. And when we first met, we had this really long, good conversation about what if there were 10,000 or 50,000 underwater robots around the world, and you could just log and treat. Cool if. Wouldn't it be cool if that existed? And we were a long way from that. I mean, that was before these miniature Linux computers existed, before a lot of this stuff was even technically possible. And so I really think the whole project, as far as we've come, has been an extension of that initial conversation, where we kind of had this dream together of like, this should exist in the world. And we've just slowly been adding more and more people to that dream. And I think it's very specific. We want to democratize exploration. We want everyone to feel like they're a part of this process, a part of exploring our oceans, whether that if they have an ROV, if they're just contributing on the forums. And so creating Open Explorer, which is kind of a way to share where you're exploring, was a really natural extension. So OpenROV, the forums on OpenROV had become really specific and geared towards what we were building together, because we had a lot of people sharing their design ideas and their add-ons and different ideas and techniques for what we could build, because that was the first challenge. To kind of have this dream come true, we had to build something that worked. And so as we had more robots and then they were exploring, we needed to shift that conversation from just what we were building to also what people were exploring. And so that's why we created Open Explorer. We call it like a digital field journal.
Yeah. So, in between your first Kickstarter project and then the project for Trident, you had iterated many times on the OpenROV. Can you talk about the decision? A lot of creators do that, where they'll do their first version on Kickstarter and it'll be a few versions later before they do another Kickstarter project. What made you decide that Trident was, the right one to do another Kickstarter for?
That's a good question. So you are correct. We did iterate a lot. We came out with OpenROV 2.4, which is what we shipped Kickstarter with, and then we came out with a new one every 6 months roughly. And there were always incremental improvements. Everything was getting better and more efficient and easier to build. The Trident idea, it's funny because I was telling the team this last week, is you know, the idea for Trident actually stems back to right after the first Kickstarter project. So when Eric got back from Antarctica, he sat me down and he sat a few other, there was only one other person two other people at OpenROV at the time. And he told us about this like vision he had for an underwater robot that could go fast and do these long transects and really actually cover a lot of ground underwater. And he sat us down and he told us this big vision that he had out on the ice in Antarctica. And he showed us this early graphic of the Trident, and it was actually, it's funny because we went back and looked at it, it's actually eerily close to what we have now. And that has always been, that presentation is still like seared in my brain. It was so moving. He was so committed and convinced and excited about this design. And it was always kind of a side project. Like we were always busy iterating the kits because that was working. That's what we were getting out to our community. That's what everyone is familiar with. But that project kind of stayed in the background. And as we learned so much and we got so many more people involved and we had more resources and we learned more about what worked and what we wanted, all of a sudden the Trident project became more than just a dream. It became kind of this place where we were taking the very, very best of everything we learned and kind of weaving that into the design. And we didn't really talk about it publicly because we weren't really sure. We weren't really sure we were going to do it. We didn't know what was going to happen. So it was always kind of this thing we were working on the side. And then all of a sudden there were some big breakthroughs that we made and it looked like it was going to be this really cool, exciting new tool. And so then we started taking it seriously. And then we decided to go back to Kickstarter because that's where we came from. You know, that was like, those are our people. And also I think I still think launching a project on Kickstarter is the best way to catalyze a new idea, something that people haven't seen before, that you want to find people who will go out on a limb and take part in your dream. And we thought the Trident was that big of a leap forward, that it was going to take a lot of believers in order to kind of see this as the future of ocean exploration. And we're really excited that so many other people agree.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about, for others out there, especially others that are working on open hardware projects or hardware in general, your process for manufacturing and fulfillment, especially, for the first version of OpenROV, because that was the first project you had done where you had to then, manufacture and ship these things to a bunch of people. Can you sort of talk about, maybe areas where there might have been tension, any advice that you would give to creators out there that are thinking about using Kickstarter to sort of get their hardware off the ground and out into the hands of the community?
Sure. So if you, it depends. This is a really complicated question and a really complicated answer because it totally depends. I think one thing I know about and we know about, because it's what we did specifically, is the people who take the route of building kits. And I think if you look at a lot of kind of the new consumer technologies, and you look at the maker movement, there have been so much that happened with kits, because there's a great article by this MIT economist named Michael Schrage who talks about kits and revolutions and how amateurs build kits and kits build talented amateurs. And so there's this really important feedback loop that happens when people are actually assembling the products that they're using. So this happened with 3D printers and drones, but even with personal computers and cars. Phase for innovation. And if you're on the edge, if you're trying to make something really new, I think it's a good idea to approach your project with as maybe as building a kit. I mean, Oculus wasn't really a kit, but it was a developer. I guess it was a developer kit. Yeah. So if you're on the edge, I think it's worth taking a good hard look at building and selling kits, at least to get started. And the good news about that is the manufacturing process is a little bit easier because all you're doing is putting parts together and then making clear documentation for how to put it together, and then providing a forum so the community can make everything better. So I distinctly remember after that first Kickstarter project that we had a huge whiteboard in Eric's garage, and it was just covered with all the things we had to do. And it was so, like, we just sat down one day and just said, okay, we just made this huge, huge list of all the things we had to do in order to get this thing shipped out. And it took us like 5 months to do it. And that was the beginning. Now we have obviously a lot more sophisticated process. We have a team of 11 here in Berkeley, and we have supply chains, and we've got suppliers and manufacturers that we work with. And it's this whole, complicated, convoluted process, but it makes sense to our team internally. So I think if you're just a couple people getting started, the kit idea is really interesting. I know a lot of people come to Kickstarter and they have these finished, polished products, and I'm always wary of people who promise a lot in terms of that, because manufacturing is super hard. It's really hard to make stuff, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, and so it's better to do it when you're younger and when you're not dealing with so much inventory and with so much on the line and with so much expectation. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Just a reminder to everyone, you can submit questions via the Google Hangout or via Kickstarter Tips on Twitter. So if you have any questions for David, any advice that you would like, please submit questions. I think it's a good point that open hardware and open source tools really lend to developing kits. It's a learning process. People are not just getting a product and then putting it on a shelf. They're really sort of digging in and getting their hands dirty and learning about how the thing is built, how it works, how it functions.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about your decision to make OpenROV an open platform, one where people can download files to, if they want to build their own OpenROV, it would be fairly easy for them to do. Can you talk a bit about your decision on that front to make it an open platform in that manner?
Yeah, sure. And I think this is actually a really good conversation that's still ongoing, because when we started doing this in 2011, 2012, open hardware was a really new idea. That's when MakerBot was getting a lot of headlines, and LittleBits, and there was an Open Hardware Association. A lot of people were taking the ideas that learned in open software and open source software and trying to apply them to hardware. And I think, that has been really successful on some fronts, like Arduino and different things, but also it's been, kind of thorny. Like, a lot of people have run into problems. There were a lot of criticism of MakerBot, and there was a whole kind of fallout from that. But by and large, I think it's really exciting, because I think that that community, this whole open hardware community, is kind of growing up and learning what works. And for Eric and I, and for our whole team, it's really important to not just to say we're open hardware or open software. Like, I don't really care about the labels as much as I do care about pushing innovation forward. And I think that has less to do with licensing and more about just making sure that ideas are getting out there, and that people, and that there's a rising tide, and that everyone benefits from what you're doing. So yeah, I don't know. I think what started, we wanted to get more people involved, has kind of evolved into something a little bit different, which is making sure that we're pushing innovation, and also that we're taking that community ethos and that sharing and applying it to different ways of exploring our planet. Make sense?
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So question from the audience. Affinity Win says, "Hi David, I'm in the process of creating my own ROV. What was the biggest challenge with OpenROV in terms of depth, buoyancy, etc.?"
Oh my gosh, so you started to cut out. You said what was the biggest challenge?
What was the biggest challenge with OpenROV in terms of depth, buoyancy, etc.?
Well, there are a lot of challenges with sending electronics underwater, basically. So that's great that you're building your own ROV. I think that's really cool, and it's a great learning experience because you have to learn about the physics and electronics and software, and you have to learn mechanics, everything. There are a number of things that are challenging. One, working in saltwater is super challenging. The depth is the biggest issue. So at every basically 30 feet you go down, it's another atmosphere of pressure. So it becomes really challenging to go deep. You need to have a lot of powerful equipment. I think for us, the most challenging thing hasn't been any of those individually. It's been trying to find the sweet spot, right? So I think there's a reason that we see so much the quadcopters, the size that they have, they're all kind of the same size, and they all fly for like 15 to 20 minutes, and they all have like roughly the same computing power, can carry the same cameras. And I think the quadcopter community figured out what the sweet spot was for these small drones because of battery technology and computing technology and cameras and things. And I think for us, we didn't have the benefit of like a big RC community, like building underwater vehicles. So we had to find what that sweet spot was going to be for, having buoyancy, being able to have a really thin, agile tether that could send live video back. And then just kind of the power, because every thruster and every motor you add is a lot more cost. So trying to figure out what's the most you could do with the least amount of thrusters. And so for us, it wasn't any specific challenge. It was more about finding the right balance between all of those different components and figuring out what's important. And I think that has been the biggest benefit of selling these kits, is because we're able to kind of iterate and eventually figure out what is the right combination. I don't know if that helps.
So in terms of the kits, people are able to make their own modifications on the OpenROV. Are there any really exciting or clever modifications that you've seen that just sort of really thrill you, or that you might even want to reincorporate into maybe future OpenROV models?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There was a group, I'm pulling it up now. There was a group that went out to the Cook Islands, and they built I just want to make sure I get the term right, because they built something really cool. It was Guy Trimbley and Paul Spahn, and they did, they created, oh my gosh, hold on, let me just look it up. Basically, they created a biofluorescence sensor package. So they were able to add these kind of different, in addition to the ROV lights, they added these very specific lights, almost like blue lights. And I can try and add a picture, but they use this for coral biofluorescent detection. And I think that is super cool, adding those different lights, because there was an interesting publication report from National Geographic explorer David Gruber, who found a biofluorescent turtle, a biofluorescent sea turtle. And I saw him give a presentation recently, and he was talking about all of this sea life that has this intriguing these biofluorescent properties. And his whole argument is that there's a whole world down there that we aren't seeing because we're using lights that we would use on land. And so for me, that's a really awesome add-on to an OpenROV, is these biofluorescent lights, so that we can really see what's going on down there in a way that the creatures don't see it. So exciting development for me.
Awesome. And just to remind everyone once again, you can submit questions on Twitter at Kickstarter Tips or via the Hangout. So, you know, in terms like that was a like scientific application for OpenROV. Can you talk about how OpenROV and even Open Explorer more generally fits into this climate of citizen science and open science and open scientific exploration?
Sure. So one of the most exciting things for me that happened over the past few years is realizing that this experience that we had, this being two people in a garage and sharing this dream world, and finding a community on Kickstarter that we weren't asking questions. And these questions are coming from people who aren't traditional question askers. You know, this is people who aren't scientists, people who aren't professional explorers. These are people who just have questions. And to me, this is an incredibly exciting movement that's happening, not within science, but it's actually happening outside of science. And I think it has a lot of potential. I mean, I think there are a lot of problems with academia as we know it. And one of the main ones is the way that people communicate science. And I think this idea of citizen science, of engaging everyone in the process, holds a ton of potential for actually getting people involved in some of these big challenges like climate change and biodiversity loss and you know, cleaning up pollution. I think we've seen glimmers of hope. And there are really positive signs coming from this new movement. And I hope that it gets a lot more attention. And I hope a lot more people see what we're doing and see this opportunity on Kickstarter and decide that, you know, I have an idea for a project that I want to do. I would love to see 1,000 new OpenROV-like projects on Kickstarter. That would just be the coolest outcome for me.
Yeah. So we have about 3 minutes left. So we're going to wrap it up with some final questions. You know, along those lines, speaking of an OpenROV-like project, there's a project recently, Tortoises for Tomorrow, where Tim Shields, who you know, was building a rover to help him with his desert tortoise research. Can you maybe talk about, because you know, you OpenROV, I guess, helped him out a little bit with that process.
Yeah.
So what was that like for you to then sort of like jump on board and be able to help another creator, you know, not do an underwater rover, but, you know, a similar technology for, you know, once again, sort of conservation type of research?
Yeah. I think, you know, I mentioned that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening outside of science, really a lot of interesting stuff happening in science as well, within science and conservation. And Tim Shields is a perfect example. I met Tim maybe even a year ago now, and he told me about his big dream to protect the desert tortoise in the Mojave. And he was a lifelong biologist. He had been out there studying tortoises for the past 40 years and has watched their numbers decline. And there's a lot of reason for sadness. I mean, that's his favorite creature in the whole world, and they're really struggling. And he still finds hope, and he found hope in the maker movement and in this idea of sharing in crowdsourcing and citizen science and getting people involved by controlling this rover over the internet. And it was so fun for the past year to talk to him and to help him and to brainstorm with him really about how to take this idea and make it something bigger. And so we had talked about Kickstarter as a really good route to building that community, and I think he raised $25,000 last month. Is that what it was?
So yeah, around that.
But more importantly, he's found all these other people who are getting behind the vision, and they're going to get it to the next level. And so he's a really sweet and important person. And I think he represents this kind of type of person who cares a lot about the natural world and is really open to using new tools to start solving some of these problems. And I think Kickstarter is becoming one of the best tools for that. And it's, Kickstarter doesn't have a science category, so it's not necessarily obvious that this type of stuff is happening. So hopefully with more examples like Tim, the science community will say, okay, maybe we don't have to get an NSF grant to do this. Maybe we can, reach out to the community and get people involved and figure out a way to make this participatory and create this kind of citizen science and this engagement. And so hopefully that Tim is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a lot more people like him who will step up in the next year.
Yeah, I certainly hope so too. Looking forward to seeing more things like your project, Tim's projects, and many of the other, even smaller projects. There was a young girl that did a project called Sunny and the Elk, where she wanted to carbon date ancient elk remains that she had found with her dad. So I think that there's, like you said, a lot of potential. Oh, you back that? Me too. A lot of potential for these things on Kickstarter, and we've just sort of hit the tip of the iceberg. Any final thoughts before we stop the broadcast?
Is I guess just find people to work with, because the money is one thing. It seems like it's a lot, and you think that's the barrier to getting your dreams off the ground, but it's really about finding other people. And so keep the focus on building the community and do it for the long term.
All right. Well, thank you, David. And thank you everyone who viewed this Hangout. I guess that's all for now. And yeah, if you have a science project, please reach out. You can reach me, Aurora, at Kickstarter.com, or on Twitter at Space Hurricanes, one word. And yeah, great talking to you.
Thanks.